Hi, and welcome to the Nucleus Nell channel. In this episode, I will talk about getting the crafting materials and supplies for your post-apocalyptic costumes and props. I will talk about what to get, what not to get, where to get it, how to get it, and so on. This is not a full guide, but I hope it will help to get you started. Let's go! A lot of you have been asking pretty much all the time, where do you get your stuff, where do you get the crafting materials to start with your works? And the standard answer I've been giving you, the short answer was flea markets, internet and grandma's garage. And those are still true, but in this episode I will go a little bit more into depth and share my experiences with you about getting stuff. Alright, so first of all, where to get stuff. Flea markets still are the number one source, at least for me. The reason being that you find all sorts of assorted shit on a flea market. There is basically everything you could find. There are old things, there are new things, there are things that people sell for a really cheap price at the same time. So a flea market, if you have one anywhere near you, that should be your number one source for anything. You can get all kinds of stuff on a flea market. Same as garage sales. Many people will sell things that are not that important to them for cheap prices as well, and you can grab them for your post-apocalyptic crafting. Talking about garages, your grandma's garage, if you have a grandma or grandpa or some other relatives or friends that have like a farmhouse or a barn or a place where there could be some old things accumulated, just raid that place. I mean, ask them first, obviously, but you will often find interesting stuff for post-apocalyptic crafting in older people houses, actually, because they sometimes keep things for generations. I got some very interesting crafting materials from Russia when I visited my grandma in 2011, and those were mostly things she even forgot existed there, so yeah. Now, the internet. I know this sounds obvious, but it for some reason is not to so many people, but there is this site called eBay. You just punch the words in there, for example, used army, and it gives you a shitload of cheap used army clothes, sometimes in bulk, sometimes some really rare items that people again sell for dump prices. So don't be afraid to search on the internet. Now, eBay is not the only place. There are also, for example, at least in the German community, dedicated online exchange places for LARPers. That is probably not going to be an exclusively German thing, so try the internet. You will find a shitload of stuff on the internet. However, you have to watch out that if you're buying cheaper items, obviously sometimes the shipping cost will make them more expensive again. Also, there are army surplus stores on the internet, obviously everywhere, and there are also many army surplus stores, probably in your city. Army surplus stores are one of my favorite sources for all of this stuff. A very interesting source are in fact post-apocalyptic events and festivals. The buckle for one of my main hip bags, which is a part of one of my main costumes, I have actually bought it for in-game money on Old Town, which is a post-apocalyptic festival in Poland. So I bought it from an in-game trader. If you're in the US and if you're a part of the Wasteland Weekend community, you probably have heard of Walmart, which is, as far as I know, a marketplace run by the post-apocalyptic people of Wasteland Weekend. I have a friend named Trashman Hags, greetings to him, so as the name says, he has all sorts of shit. Like, sometimes he just gives me a bunch of belts for free, sometimes I give him something for free. And if I needed something specific, even in a large amount, I could just hit him up and go like, hey Trashman, can you get this and that? And he would probably be able to. So having friends like this, or at least buddies like this, or at least knowing people like this can help you a great deal as well. You can totally go to a auto shop, like to a car shop, somewhere where they repair vehicles of any sort, or you can go to a junkyard or any place similar where there could be just some junk parts from cars that they would throw away. And you just go there and ask them politely if you could have some of their junk parts for an art project. Don't try to explain them what this whole wasteland thing is unless, unless they care. Just say it's for an art project and you're a student doing art, whatever. And 9 out of 10 times they will say sure. As long as you don't take all of our junk in a big hauler, it's okay. Just go ahead and scavenge through it and take a couple of parts. And you can get some great used car parts and other parts from a junkyard or from an auto shop. You should scavenge for materials in unexpected places. For example, if you know my leather skirts, of which I did a couple in the past, which are by the way available as custom commissions still, I made those out of leather scavenged from some old leather sofas. So I had this leather sofa and it got old and I decided to get rid of it, but before I got rid of it I skinned it for its leather. So that's just one of the examples. Another example, I don't know what you call it, it's basically, it blocks the direct sunlight on my window. And this is actually a great piece of fabric. So if this ever breaks, falls off, I can just, detach it and use the fabric. This is a part from an old grandfather clock. Could make an awesome timepiece out of this. And this is the cover of a speaker. Sometimes you can scavenge stuff like this out of home electronics. This right here was also from the same grandfather clock. Check it out. Fancy! You basically need to think like a scavenger, sort of. And that, again, applies to not just to your own stuff, but to the stuff that you find at your friends' places, at your relatives' places, someone throwing away a leather sofa. Hell, that's a shitload of good leather you can use. That's just one of the examples. Again, people throw away useful stuff all the time. I went to my neighbors and told them, if you have something to throw away, run it by me first. And many of the times the stuff they're throwing away is junk. I also don't want it. But sometimes it's something useful, or parts of it are useful. For example, there could be like a standing lamp that you put on the floor, and you don't need the whole thing, but you might want the dish, the reflective dish, or you might want the metal pipe out of it. It's a free metal pipe, okay? So scavenge. Think like a scavenger. Now that we have had a short rundown of the places, which basically are can be summed up as fucking anywhere, just have your eyes open. Let's think about what we should be getting and what we should not be getting, especially in bulk, especially what should you grab as soon as you see it, and what should you better leave where it is. So number one, on flea markets especially, sometimes you find gold pieces like this. This is a carabiner for climbing by Saliva. I know the camera focuses. There it is. It wasn't painted black like this. I've painted it black and then torn some of the paint away. Got 2 of those for €7, which at first sounds like a lot, but it's not for this quality of a carabiner. And I mean, look at this thing. The form is beautiful. So if you find gold pieces like this, just grab them. It would have been worth €20. So all sorts of interesting items like these, which you otherwise would get for a much higher price, or not at all. Now, of course, there are always all sorts of belts, buckles and the like, and this you find in bulk in online or offline in army stores or army store sales. So this is just, this is a regular German army belt from a couple of generations ago, and you can always use this. You can use it for anywhere in your outfit. You can use it as a belt, you can use it as part of the outfit in some other way. It's always useful, same as this. Like, There is no situation in which this is not useful, so grab this kind of stuff. However, be careful depending on the source. Some retailers demand like 10 euros for a belt like this. I mean, it would be worth it if, like for its actual military use when it was new, blah 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 blah. But for you just using it for crafting, look for sources that offer it to a cheaper price. So you basically can always find some guy who has like 50 of those lying around and wants to dump them for 10 bucks just to get rid of them. As a very good example. To be honest, like a belt like this, it would run me on an average day probably like 3 euros, anywhere between 2 to 4 euros if I'm lucky. So again, depending on the source, depending if I somehow manage to grab a large bulk of them somewhere from someone who doesn't want them. This particular one I got from Trashman for free. So all kinds of belts and buckles are always useful. Now these are, for example, also from the same category. Those are just shoulder cushions for your backpack. And these I've bought online from a army surplus store. A find from a flea market. Now this is just a length of a rubberized band. I have several rolls of those because there was a guy in a flea market who offered those, and this is awesome, especially for, you know, fastening armor to your body parts. It's stretchy and at the same time it has this nice olive color and it's just awesome. So when you get offers like this for useful stock material, then do take it. For example, up there, I don't know if you can see it or not, this red thing right there. That's a roll of some material, it's some fabric. I found it on a flea market for 4 euros total, the whole roll. It is like 10 square meters, that's super cheap for this kind of fabric. And it was just a lucky find. You don't always go to a flea market and find exactly what you're looking for. That's the disadvantage of that. But sometimes you do find stuff like this, and if you get 10 square meters of awesome fabric for 4 euros, grab that shit right now. Doesn't mean you shouldn't haggle. You always should, but still. Right, so what's next on the list? Screws, bolts, nuts, other assorted small junk. Right here I have a box full of all kinds of assorted junk. And I got this whole box for 15 euros. The way you do it is you just go to the guy and say, how much does one bolt cost? He's like, yeah, this and that. How much do 2 bolts cost? This and that. And then you go like, how about I take this whole crate, including the crate, right now without haggling for 15 euros? And they will usually say yes, because they want to get rid of this shit. Check this out. I have 2 of those. I could make a snail. If you see something that you are sure you can use, and I'm using those small junk pieces for small components in my costumes all the time, then just grab it, it will be worth it, because then you have something to choose from. Alright, another good example. This is from an ice skate. I got this for 1 euro. This would make an awesome arm defense / offense thingy. Or things like this. That's a lot of measurement tape. Like, I could go measuring dicks with someone for real with this. I don't know what I will use this for just yet, but for something I sure will. And if the prices are as low as 1 euro or half a euro for something like this, then grab it if your budget allows it. Or this car part right here. I've actually scavenged that. It's small, it's light, it looks kind of futuristic and sci-fi-ish if you think about it. It's actually a windshield wiper. Right, next on the list. Yeah, spark plugs, clutches, all sorts of car parts that you don't get as junk. Now, sometimes a clutch or a spark plug you get on a flea market is not necessarily non-junk. You could, in many cases, you could not make it work. Sometimes you can, sometimes not. But if you're just using it for costumes and you see a clutch, like that clutch backpack I made, the clutch in that has run me like 10 euros on a flea market. It's still a big car part, you know, so, and it's an awesome looking car part, so that's okay. But if you see some really interesting stuff, especially you will rarely find spark plugs in auto shops as something that they would throw away for some reason. I don't know. I never found spark plugs there, so spark plugs, you get them on a flea market. Cheap army vests to use as base. So both this and this are on base of a certain model of a army vest from the German military from a long time ago. And I got those vests. I think I bought 3 of them for 15 euros, something like this. Again, from a guy who didn't want to have it. And a cheap army vest, it doesn't really need to be super awesome by itself. I mean, those are, and I'm talking about the base vests, but they don't have to be. Because on top of your base vest you will put all kinds of other stuff that is basically your design. It's a topic for a separate video, how to make a vest. I will get to that. Yes, I've received the many requests about, especially about this one. So I will make a video on how to make a vest in the future, but for now, cheap army vests or some other cheap base clothing to mod into something. Because if you have a base to start with, let's say this jacket I'm wearing right now, or this pullover, if I wanted to start me having this already and being able to just start attaching shit to it, it saves me so much time. So yeah, that's always good to find good bases. And in general, old clothing that is already close to awesome. For example, this leather jacket, which is underneath that vest. Look at those elbows. So when I saw that, I was like, whoa, that is cool, I want to have that. I didn't even know back then what I will turn it into, but the guy offered that leather jacket for 15 euros, and that's not a lot for a good leather jacket. A good thing to have, if you run across a stash of duct tape, get that stash of duct tape. Duct tape is always good for you. Same as zip ties. Alright, duct tape and zip ties hold the world together, so if you get a good offer for them on a flea market or elsewhere, get those. And sometimes you will find good but cheap tools that you can use. For example, my scissors, I found them on a flea market, they cost me 5 euros, which is a lot for a pair of used scissors, but that's because they were still in a very good condition. New scissors like those, maybe 20 euros. So sometimes on a flea market, when you see a good tool, which is a bit used but in a good condition, or one that you can bring into a good condition, get that. Sometimes you can also find some old tools, or weapons, but this is a tool actually. And I did not mod this, I just bought this for 1 euro from a flea market, and it makes an awesome prop. And the only thing I really did here was run some sandpaper along the edge. So while many things of this sort that you find for a very cheap price on a flea market might not be really good tools anymore, they will make some awesome props. I also did not really mod this, except I'm not really sure if I even added some dirt here or if it was like this. And I've used this axe in some pictures, so that's a good way to get some weapon props. Flea market, 1 euro, I mean it's so fucking rusty, normal people don't know what to do with it. For us, it's perfect. I don't know what this is, but this is awesome. It looks cool, it is very, very light. It has a nice surface which you can just mount onto something. There goes a new decoration, obviously with some more stuff on it. This is also from a car. I'm not sure if it's a part of a clutch. I think it's a part of a clutch, or maybe it's from a brake. I'm not that good with cars. I think it was from a clutch. And yeah, this is a bit heavy but not too much, and for how awesome it looks, the weight is justified, and it's also cheap. Cheap paints. Now this is really interesting. I got this and this. Those 2 cans of automotive paint from a flea market for 1 euro each. 1 euro each. Usually you would get them for like 10 to 15 euros each. And that's because they are from the 80s. Someone, you know, found them in their garage. There was like a whole box. I regret I didn't buy more of them, because those paints are awesome, and to that price you really cannot complain. Okay, so you have to watch out though that the cans actually work and that there is nothing poisonous in it from like the 40s or whatever, whenever it may be from, when they put asbestos into paint. I'm just kidding. I don't think they put asbestos into paint. You know, just watch out for safety. Not everything you buy on a flea market is safe, especially chemicals, but those paints are awesome. So watch out for cheap paints, because, you know, for post-apo crafting, 9 out of 10 times you don't care about the actual quality of your paint or whatever, because you want it to look distressed in the end anyway. So decorations and pin-ups and insignia and all stuff of that sort, you can buy tons of those on flea markets especially, and sometimes for really cheap prices. However, you have to watch out, like sometimes you can find insignia which are like priced collector items and run like 10 euros for such a small piece. You don't want that. You want the ones that run 1 euro for 10 pieces. Okay? For example, getting Russian insignias in Germany is very expensive, which is why I get my Russian insignia from Russia, where you get them for a couple of rubles. Alright, now let's get to what kind of supplies you should not get. This is the stuff I used to get as a beginner and I regret getting it, so maybe you can learn from my mistake right here. Alright, number one, especially when you're going on a flea market or when you're on a LARP or somewhere else where the prices are generally low, don't get too much at once. Alright? A flea market can suck your pocket dry, because it's 1 euro here, 5 euros there, and then whoops, 5 hours later you don't have 100 euros that you had before. That happened to me before, and I'm doing this professionally, so that's kind of justified, and I used the most of that stuff. But if you do it as a hobby, it might get out of control real fast, because, you know, it's just, you know, you see so much awesome stuff on flea markets, you just have to control yourself, basically. Which is why I just dedicate an amount of money I take there, and, you know, don't take more money with me. And it's not that I'm so bad at managing money, it's just that there are so many awesome items that you will probably use at some point, or at least you think you do, and let's get to those first. So, the things that you think you will use, but you actually won't, for reasons. Number one offender being stuff that is too heavy, alright? Too heavy or otherwise impractical, but heavy taking the cake. Let me show you some examples. So, this thing, this is steampunk as hell. And, you know, I got this. It wasn't expensive, but the thing with this is, it is kind of hefty. It is kind of heavy. It has probably like 1.5 kilos weight to it. And to use it, for example, to put it on someone's back, I would have to first saw this off, or I don't know. It is probably better used in a gun prop, for which it's actually fine, because, you know, you can put your gun on the ground sometimes, you don't have to wear it all the time. And you would say 1.5 kilo is not that bad, but if one of your parts is 1.5 kilo, another is, and the third is, trust me, your costume will quickly become very heavy. It's actually one of the topics I'm talking about in the common post-apocalyptic costuming beginner mistakes video, which you can find in my video list. But to put it short, don't underestimate weight of things. It will accumulate and it will crush your ass. So this is not very practical. I might use it in a gun though, sometime. But this is not very practical, even if it looks cool. So it has been sitting in my collection of junk for multiple years now. Another prime example is car tires. Okay? Now, those couple of guys aside who work with car tires all the time and make armors just of car tires and they're awesome at doing their car tire stuff, those guys aside, I personally have always found that car tires are very hard to work with, like actual hard tires. They're pretty heavy, they're pretty unpractical, so in spite of it being a post-apocalyptic trope, now you might say, I have seen tires in your work, and those were bicycle tires. Now this I can cut with my scissors. Now a car tire has all kinds of stuff in it. It has metal wire in it. It's heavy, it's sturdy. Okay, so unless you're one of those guys, don't get a shitload of car tires. Like your first day on the flea market for your first post-apocalyptic project, for the love of God, don't get a tire this big. You will not wear that, okay? Or if you will, then, you know, just start small and then add to it and so on and so forth. Don't go too big at the start. Don't spend all of your money on this kind of stuff. Don't get the most heavy stuff at once. This goes not just for post-apo crafting, this goes for everything. This is also one of those examples of stuff not to buy. So what's the problem with this? You say, it looks awesome, it's a large, supermassive piece of protective equipment. And yeah, this is actually still usable. It is very massive, it protects well. The problem with this is, for some reason, for one reason or another, this has been sitting in my storage since I bought it. It's just too big, it's just too uncomfortable to run around with, and I did not yet incorporate it into any outfit. At some point I will. I'm waiting for the commission job, which calls for huge shoulder pads, so I can finally use this up. But this and its other leg counterpart, because those are knee protectors, it's taking up so much space in my storage and I did not use it yet, so this was not a really good purchase. In spite of my first impulse, which was like, whoa, this is massive, this is awesome, but this is just happened to be too massive. So watch out, again, the bigger is not always better. Same as this. Scavenged it from an auto shop. Now I can't really compress it, it's too damn big, and I cannot really do anything with it. I mean, I could probably put it into a really large weapon prop, but again, this is quite heavy. Could make a handheld weapon out of this actually, so this is cool, but I did not use this yet, and chances are I won't, because there are more elegant, more light solutions for stuff like this. So again, the weight problem. Dangerous stuff. For example, like you want to put a tank on your back and you find an awesome tank on a flea market and it happens to be full of gas they use for welding. And then you forget to drain that tank and then you go into the desert with it and then you trip and then everything explodes, including you, and so on and so forth. That's just an exaggerated example. But again, not everything you always find is always going to be safe. Especially just because you've seen something in a computer game or a movie doesn't mean it's safe. Chances are it's not. So don't assume stuff, always check for safety, and there are various kinds of items that are not safe for many particular reasons. Usually it involves them having some sort of sharp edges and tearing you up, stuff like this. It's a topic for a separate video, but stuff that is inherently dangerous, avoid it. Talking about protection and danger and stuff like this, so getting some gas masks or goggles or like from a flea market for your costume is fine. However, chances are if you get an old gas mask, chances are there is all sorts of nasty shit in the filter. It doesn't work anymore at best, and there might be a bird's nest inside of that gas mask filter for all you know. So if you're looking for actual protective gear, do spend the money in a proper construction store, Home Depot or whatever. Just get a proper protective respirator, protective goggles for working. So unless you're using it for your costume, do not get actual protective gear for protective gear purposes from doubtful sources. Okay. Now there is the next point is stuff that is too brittle or otherwise too tricky to work with or too small. So when I was a beginner, I was saving certain type of clippings from belt. Let me show you. Alright, so it's this set of belts, which is, by the way, the Koppeltragegestell. And yes, I will post a link in the video description where you can get those buckles in the US. You can get them from Karol Bartoszyński of Wasteland Weekend. And if you're in Germany or in Europe, just punch in Koppeltragegestell into Google and you will find some in army stores. So I used to cut these off for reasons, you know, so I can release the buckles. And I used to keep these small parts because, you know, it looks kind of cool. And what I might do is, you know, put a thread through one of the corners and put them like on a chain or sew them on a jacket. I never did, you know why? Because it's so tricky, it's so small, it's so nasty to work with. It would be so much work for a doubtful effect that I actually never save those. And it's just an example of a thing that is too tricky to work with. You will never work with it because even if you think at the moment you might, it is just too much trouble. It's just too much fiddling to work with this kind of stuff. So I've just dumped my collection of those things because, you know, it's just too goddamn impractical. So of course you need to spend some time and make some mistakes to find out what is actually practical and impractical for you. But think twice before you get something. Think, is it just cool, or will I actually have fun working with this? Okay? Stuff that requires epic amounts of preparation. Now, for example, I don't have a good example actually, but if there is something that you think can be made into a cool component for your costume, but you know it requires 5 hours of sanding and you need to repaint it, and first you need to cut the parts of it free, you are probably not gonna do it. I mean, I have a couple of things like this that are lying around, like parts of old office chairs and stuff, from which I could make an armor part, but for that I need to cut off, you know, 5 bolts in weird places, and I just never get around to it. I find better, faster ways to solve the problems at hand, so those parts are just lying around. So if a certain part of what you're getting would require a shitload of preparation to even get it to a state where you can use it for your costume, chances are you will not bother to do that in the first place. Same goes for stuff that takes up a ton of space but doesn't give much in return. Now, I have an example for that. This is also from an office chair, like this is from my old chair. And I didn't throw this away. I think I will though, because, you know, even if it's kind of cool and, you know, I could cut off the arms and use them for something, I don't know, I would not buy this on a flea market. Because it's big, it takes up a lot of space, and again, there are other methods of getting there. So the only reason I have this is because I had it, and now it's sitting on my balcony waiting for like half a year, and if half a year passes and I didn't use this by then, I probably never will, so into trash it goes. Old clothing that is not already pretty close to what you want to have, and cool. I also have an example for that. So, track pants, old track pants. Now I have actually used those for a zombie survivor character that was like a Russian bandit kind of guy, you know, like you find in Stalker. So sometimes this sort of stuff is useful for a specific costume, but just stockpiling old clothing that is really close to normal and boring, it's just gonna take up a lot of space, right? Especially if we're talking about this wasteland genre like Mad Max, Fallout, whatever. You're not gonna find a lot of use for regular old clothing. So don't stockpile old junk clothes unless they're close to, unless those clothes are close to what you want to do. Alright, on the other side of the coin we have expensive new army clothing that people buy just to distress it. I heard of a guy who spent 1,000 euros on a set of full new army clothing for a Fallout-like universe event, and then he distressed it a bit, and then it of course didn't fit, because who the hell goes with a full modern set of army clothing to a Fallout-like event? And that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make, especially if you're a total beginner. Then your first kit, if you make it yourself, just material-wise, should not cost a lot whatsoever. So don't get a full set of new army clothing just to, you know, destroy it, basically. Get used stuff for cheap. Next, shitty tools that you cannot restore or use properly. So if you're looking for tools, then you really must get good tools, or at least decent tools. Otherwise, it will just cause all sorts of trouble. It's dangerous, you can poke yourself in the hand with it, whatever it may be. Because tools that are not in good condition are generally dangerous, and it will also not be fun to work whatsoever. So don't get like that almost destroyed hammer for €1 just because it's €1. Better get the hammer for €5 that is in almost top-notch condition. Okay, don't get cheap tools just because they're cheap. Not on flea market, not anywhere. A couple of advices on how to haggle on a flea market. So, number one advantage that we all have as post-apocalyptic costuming people. People don't know what we want the stuff for, and usually the stuff being in the shittiest condition possible, as in the most distressed looking condition possible, is good for us. So the number one argument, look, I would pay like €5 for this, but you know, it's so rusty. I would have to spend so much time making it not rusty anymore, because again, they don't know that you want to have it rusty. How about €3, and then they will usually go down with the price a bit. Because, you know, the most people want new shit. It might be surprising, it is surprising to me every time, but the most people want new, undistressed shit, okay? So that's number one. And number next, I've named this already, if you see a bunch of something that you really want to get, then negotiate in such a way that you will take all of it, possibly with the container, right now, for some price that is comfortable for you, and it is gonna be usually a price that is a lot lower as if you were buying every item single, because those people on the flea markets, or on a garage sale, they just want to get rid of that stuff, okay? And if they're getting rid of it fast and at the same time get an okayish price, they will still say yes, because they're getting rid of it really fast. So one of the criteria that they're after is fulfilled. Okay, now let's get to the next part. When and what for to go to stores that offer new equipment. Like for example to a construction store, or again to the internet, and buying new items. So when does it make sense? So here I have a bunch of those 3mm screws. And I actually have, well, not many left in this one, but I actually have like 10 boxes of those screws right here, and I got them from the local construction store. And this is an item I use all the time, and I don't want to fiddle around. Every time I want to connect something, which I do like 100 times per costume, I don't want to fiddle around, find the proper screw or whatever. So for those, I just get a bunch of new standardized screws, and it saves me a lot of time, and time is money. Okay, so for stuff that will save you fiddling, save you searching for standard operations, just get the new stuff. I might find a piece of nut like this for decorative purposes from my junk box to use on certain places that I've selected to use it on. But for standard operations, I'm just using those standard 3mm screws, same all the time, with same washers all the time, with same nuts all the time. Just save yourself some trouble, okay? So you don't have to scavenge materials that you use all the time from everything. Duct tape, double-sided adhesive duct tape. This one's very expensive. It's the most powerful duct tape from a good company, okay? And I get that because this just holds dead. It's perfect for drafting purposes, so I don't want my work process to be impeded by subpar adhesive tape, so I get this. Of course, if on a flea market I would see a pallet of like 10 of those to a good price, I would grab it, you know, but usually I don't. So really good working materials, really good expendable working materials, they are worth it, and they are worth getting new, okay? Also sometimes in construction stores you will find some futuristic looking stuff. So if you watched my Gauss rifle video, I can show you one of the components of that rifle right now. So here are those drywall connectors from a construction store. Here is another type of a drywall connector, and those are like 30 cents a piece, and they look science fiction as fuck. So sometimes you find useful crafting stuff also in stores that offer new equipment. What else do you get new? Obviously chemicals, like this 2-component epoxy glue. I got this online for 15 euros, actually. Not that cheap, not that expensive for this amount of high quality, fast drying epoxy. If you get epoxy from some garage sale, well, it might not work at all. I don't, I prefer not taking risks with chemicals, because they might not work, they might be dangerous, whatever. I rather get the new stuff, the real stuff. Unless it's some relatively safe stuff like those paints I've shown before. Yeah, obviously, as I mentioned before, protective gear, you get that from a construction store, you get new proper protective gear, unless you inherit it from your father or whatever, or from someone who you trust, that it's still good. Let me know in the comments below if I answered the bulk of your questions about how to get and where to get materials for crafting. And if you like this video, then like, comment, subscribe, and also go to my Patreon page, which is the first link in the video description. And with your support on Patreon, I'm able to make more of these videos for you. And I will see you in the next episode. Until then, hail the snail!